Okay guys, let's talk about arrow wraps. If you're watching this video, then you either are interested in using arrow wraps and haven't used them before, or you already use them and you just want to pick up some tips and pointers on how to install them. But let's talk about arrow wraps real quick for just a minute or two here. There are pros and cons with arrow wraps, so you need to understand what you're getting into when you're putting wraps on your arrows. We'll start with the pros. If you look at these arrows, I mean, those are good looking arrows, right? It makes them pretty. I mean, aesthetically pleasing, right? You want to have cool equipment. It makes you want to use it more. So I like that aspect about it. I'm going to consider that a pro. Another pro is just visibility coming off your bow and during flight and during penetration. So these things are bright, right? They're going to give you a lot of visibility. So you're going to be able to see your arrow fly a lot better than you would if you didn't have wraps on. And it also makes your arrows a little bit easier to find once you've shot through something, a pass through, you've lost an arrow, made a bad shot, whatever the case is, you're out looking for the arrow. Brightness is a whole lot easier to see than no arrow wraps for sure. Another great thing too is for hunting purposes especially, I like using either a white or a yellow wrap for a couple of reasons. One, visibility is fantastic coming off the bow. But number two is if you get a pass through and you find your arrow, this is going to give you a really good idea of your shot placement and how well you, how lethally you hit that animal, because you're going to be looking at the blood and you'll have a lot of blood. Hopefully you'll have a lot of blood to see on the wrap. If you're just looking at that blood on a black or a gray arrow shaft, it's difficult to see exactly what you have. Man, does the blood show up great on the yellow or the white. So there are some of the pros. Obviously, I use wraps for hunting, again, because of that visibility, because of that X factor with how well you can see the blood once you get a pass through. Now, cons, there are a couple of cons as well. One of them is that they add weight. So it's going to add weight to the back of your arrow. So if you're trying to get a certain FOC, front of center weight, you want more weight up front. If you put that wrap on the back, some of these wraps, the ones we're going to be using today, are about 10 grains per wrap, which isn't much. Some of the larger ones, like the ones on these arrows, are about 15 to 20. So you are going to add some weight to the back of your arrow. So just keep that in mind. And the other thing is too, and this is probably for me the worst thing about using an arrow wrap, is if you nick one of your arrows when you're during practice, you nick a fletching, you knock a fletching off, one of your vanes comes off, whatever the case is. Sometimes I pass through these targets out here because these are such heavy arrows, and I lose a vane or two. Well, when you lose a vane or two on a wrap, unfortunately that means you're taking the entire wrap off and you're starting over. So you have to re-wrap and re-fletch when you lose your vanes. When you don't have the wraps on, it's super easy just to go back in, clean it off, and put one or two vanes on instead of replacing all of them. So those are the cons that I can think of anyway. It's kind of a personal preference thing. Again, I think they're great for hunting. So anyway, okay, let's get started with the wraps. I'm gonna put these guys away over here real quick. And so the first thing that you're gonna wanna do before you install your wraps is make sure that the shaft is clean. So we're gonna get our trusty rag and acetone again, which is your friend. Gonna get a little acetone on here, and let's just clean the back end of this shaft off where you're gonna apply the wrap, and make sure that is completely clean, no residue, nothing on there, so we know we're gonna get a good adhesion. Okay, I've already cleaned the other 11 of these, so they are ready to go. We're gonna talk about the wraps we're using real quick. So we're going to actually use the yellow ones, but I wanted to show you something that's really neat about these. So these are State wraps. Brian at State Wraps has really taken care of me when it comes to my wraps, whether they're the custom ones with my logo and stuff on them, or just plain wraps, or he does all kinds of really cool stuff. But I asked him in the very beginning of our relationship, when I started buying these, if there was any way that we could mark these so that we could cut them. So when you're using a smaller diameter arrow, you don't have so much overlap in your wrap. Most wraps just come, they're basically one width. You roll them on. If you're using a micro diameter arrow, you're going to have quite a bit of overlap on the wrap. Now it's not critical, but any place on the arrow shaft that there's more weight than the rest of the shaft can cause a little bit of a wobble. So I'm just trying to eliminate that as much as possible. So Brian was cool enough to put marks on these for me so I could cut these. So basically I'm going to show you here real quick. Yeah, you can see these marks. See these marks down here and up here? So basically the outside or no line, if you're using a standard diameter arrow, then you just use the wrap and as it is. If you're using a 5mm diameter, a little bit smaller diameter arrow, you cut it at that first line, and if you're using micro diameter, 4mm like we are today, you cut at that second line. So those cut lines come in really handy because you can actually cut off, you know, the portion of the wrap that you don't need, so you don't get that, you know, that large amount of overlap. So today we're using the 4mm arrows, so I've gone ahead and cut all of these down to the 4mm size. I used that last line. I just used a standard paper cutter. That's the easiest way to do it because you know you're straight that way. You can use scissors, you can use an X-Acto knife, etc. It's super easy. But State Wraps, good stuff. I do carry State Wraps, you know, on the site, arrowjunkie.com, or you can go to the State Wrap site and just buy from Brian as well. It does not matter to me. I'd love to sell you some stuff, but he does some really, really quality work. So check out State Wraps. Anyway, okay, moving on. Let's show you how to do this. Okay, we're ready to go here. I'm going to show you guys how to do this. It's super easy. I'm going to explain something to you real quick, just something that I do that you might want to think about doing. I like to make sure that all my arrows match with wraps on them. When I put wraps on them, I want my logos to be in one spot. I want it to look pretty, set them all next to each other, and they look great. That may be something you're not interested in. You don't have to do that. You can just put these wraps on and you know, and fletch them however you want. But we know we're using VAP TKOs, so we know that we have our spine aligned already for us. It's already marked on the arrow, which is fantastic. So we know we want that in the 12 o'clock position. I like to have, just for ease of use, when you grab your arrow and you look at it, you know exactly where that cock feather is or that cock vein is. So I like to have my wraps with my logo, basically my logos lined up with where the cock vein is going to go. So I'm going to show you how to do that real quick. It's really easy. There's nothing hard about this stuff, and veins are just fun. So I'm going to peel this off. Make sure when you set this down that you set it the way you want it to go on the arrow. You don't want it upside down. You want it to be right side up. So make sure you do that. I'm going to go ahead and the hardest part is getting your fingers off of these things, to be honest with you. But I'm going to go ahead and line this up using the very bottom of my Arrow Junkie arrow word logo here as my kind of my straight edge. So I'm going to make sure that this thing is straight. And that, again, getting your fingers off without moving it is the hardest part. Okay, so I'm lined up there. I'm going to move this out of the way. So in order to get this Expert Series spine line, this is what I want on top, right in line with my logo, right? So that needs the wraps at 180 degrees. This needs to be at 180 degrees when we check this. So this is how I'm going to figure this out. So I know if you look at this one, my logos are basically pretty much, I'm going off the Sasquatch here, it's pretty much right in the middle of this wrap. So I'm going to take and go basically right to the middle of this wrap, and we're just lining this up right now. And I know that the top of the arrow, my 12 o'clock position of the arrow, is 180 degrees below this. So I should be lined up pretty good. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to roll this back real quick right to the edge of the wrap. So that's where my wrap is going to start right there. And I'm going to get myself a mark so that I know exactly where I need to do every one of these arrows, so I don't have to do this every time. So I've got some small writing right here for proper use and safety. Go to victory.com, safety, blah, blah, blah. So I know that needs to be right at about 11 o'clock every time I do this. So now I know that's at 11 o'clock. I'm going to move this over. I do this without the nocks, and I line it up to where it is right at the edge of the carbon. That's how I like to do it. Sometimes I'll even come in where there's just a little, like a 32nd inch of wrap hanging over. It doesn't hurt, and it actually helps seat your nock if there's a little bit. Anyway, then I'll take it and just slide it forward until it connects. So you saw the wrap is moving now, right? So I know that I'm on line. So now I'm going to press down and I'm going to roll just a little bit. You can see that it's adhering. I'll roll it back, make sure that's seated really, really good. Give it a little bit of pressure, and then we're going to just roll, push down on this mat. This mat is great for this. push down on the mat, roll it back and forth a few times. We're gonna make sure we get our bubbles out, and then we're just gonna hope that we lined up like we were supposed to line up. All right, and we got pretty close. So our Aero Junkie logo is dead center with it, which is fantastic. The Sasquatch logo is off just a little bit, but not much. So that looks great. So I'm gonna do the same thing for every one of these now. Okay, so we got this one done. I'm gonna go ahead and grab the rest of these and get these wrapped. I'll show them to you when they're done, and then we'll just kind of wrap this, no pun intended, wrap this video up. Okay, I've got them all wrapped. They all ended up looking great. You can see everything's lined up there, looking pretty. So now, move this back over here so you guys can see me. Now we're ready to, we're ready to fletch these. But first things first, so I just wanted a little disclaimer here. Arrow wrapping can be done several different ways. It doesn't have to be done exactly like this. You can do it many different ways. You can move the wraps up and down. They don't have to be exactly at the back of the arrow, right at the nock. You can play with this. That's one of the fun things about building your own arrows, especially when you add wraps. You can mess around with it. You can play with it. You can use long wraps, short wraps. You can crest them. You can do all kinds of fun things with it. So anyway, this is how I do my wraps, and I wanted to pass that along because it's just what I've learned over the years. Tricks and tips of the trade of just doing it for a long time and doing it as easy as possible so that I can get these things knocked out. So that's arrow wrapping. Now, if you are going to, again, we talked about these are spine aligned already. These are, Victory VAP TKOs, so we know where the spine alignment is, so we don't really have to worry about knock tuning these. If you are going to knock tune your arrows to find your spine alignment, which that's a whole different rabbit hole, there are a lot of great videos out on YouTube for that. You guys can check those out. But if you're going to do that, now's the time to do that with these shafts before you start fletching them. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you learned a little something from it. I hope it was somewhat fun. Wraps are just fun. I like wraps. They just kind of make the arrows look cool, and it's just a fun part of building your own arrow. So I hope you learned something from it, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, would do me a favor and hit the like button on this video. And if you haven't subscribed to the Aero Junkie YouTube channel, I would greatly appreciate that too. All right, we'll see you on the next one, and we'll start fletching these bad boys.